Murray is a true polymath. He entered Yale at age 15. I think he graduated at age 16 or so. He's went on from there to really become the instigator of finding the quark, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1969. He's a linguist who's widely published in that field. In fact, he's published myriad papers on academic subjects. He's also published books, including the book that defined, kind of for a general audience, his theories on simplicity and complexity, a book called The Quark and the Jaguar. He was a co-founder of the Santa Fe Institute, which is a pioneering and a premier interdisciplinary research center in Santa Fe, which was made famous in part for what it brought to the study of complexity. And I could go on, but we are going to sit down and talk a bit about just a couple of your ideas on how to be a catalyst. I mean, you have been, in many ways, a catalyst. And so it's a privilege to get to sort of sit down with you and talk with you a bit about how you do that. And why don't we just sort of start there? Start with the quark, actually. How did that theory come about?
Well, that's a very good thing to start with because it can illustrate something we ought to talk about. What is a quark? Well, we heard how, and most of us know anyway, how atoms are made up of nuclei, which in turn are made up of neutrons and protons, and then there are electrons as well. So we have a nucleus with electrons swarming around it. The nucleus, as I said, made of neutrons and protons. But the neutrons and protons turn out not to be the elementary particles that everybody thought they were. Instead, each neutron or proton is made of 3 quarks, roughly speaking. And people ask me, how did you think of that? Well, it turns out it was very easy. If you look at a chart of various discovered particles, some kind of thing you heard about in an earlier talk, it's pretty obvious that the neutron and proton ought to be made of 3 quarks each. It's not, but it is very difficult to believe it. That's why it wasn't immediately advertised by everybody as a model or as a theory. Because it violated, the quark idea violated some well-known principles. For example, that the neutron and proton are elementary. Everybody knew they were elementary. So, of course, they're not made up of smaller things. Second, an elementary particle should have a charge that's an integral multiple of the proton's charge. Could be in units of the proton's electric charge. It could, the charge of the new particle could be 1 or 0 or -1 or 2, but not 2/3 or -1/3. But those are the electric charges of the quarks, plus 2/3 and -1/3. Third principle, nobody had ever heard of a particle type such that the particle was always confined inside something else, the way the quarks are permanently confined inside things like the neutron and proton. Can't get out. Nobody had ever heard of anything like that. So we had 3 clearly defined ideas that made the quarks wrong. But those 3 ideas were themselves wrong. That was the problem with them. And that occurs over and over and over again in science. Look at the Maya Glyphs in Mexico and Central America. The 2 kinds of these characters, often chiseled in stone. One set describe calendrical, astronomical information about the apparent rising and setting of the sun in different places in the sky, the motions of the planet Venus, the motions of the moon, apparent motions of the moon, and so on, are all described in these calendrical glyphs, and they were deciphered 100 years ago or so. But that left the non-calendrical glyphs. What were they? Well, the dictator of Maya studies at that time was the Englishman Sir J. Eric S. Thompson, sorry. And this influential Englishman ruled that the non-calendrical glyphs were not writing. He didn't say what they were, but they were definitely not writing. And anyone who tried to publish a paper saying they were writing was unsuccessful. Anybody who wanted to be promoted at a university had better agree that they were not writing. There's only one trouble. They were writing. It took a Russian scholar, Yuri Knorozov, to carry out the first steps of the correct decipherment. That's the kind of thing goes on all the time.
So in the case of the quark, how did you get people to come around to your point of view?
Well, two things. One was that it was clear to a lot of people that the quark picture explained a great many things. Second, some friends of mine at Stanford University, at the accelerator there, were able to take what amounts to an electron microscope picture of the proton. And roughly speaking, there were the three quarks.
So you had evidence.
So there was certainly evidence, yes. But it often takes a long time to overcome these rules that you mustn't think in a certain way. I was asked once by a company to appear in a commercial on television for the company. I wasn't supposed to praise the company, nor even mention it. I was just supposed to discuss asking why not, because that's what we've been talking about. Why this negative prescription that you mustn't think in a certain way? Why not think in that way? So I talked about it a little bit, and they paid me a substantial fee. And then it turned out it was a quite successful commercial. And they renewed it for another year, paying me my fee a second time, as they were obliged to do by the rules of Actors' Equity. I also got a second year's membership in the Screen Actors Guild. And then they invited me to come to their headquarters and talk to their important employees on the intranet. And in fact, talked to all their employees who were awake at the time, given that many of them were in different parts of the world. Talked to all of them through the intranet, the company intranet. So I did, and I talked about how I don't know much about business, but I know a little bit about theoretical science. And I assume that there's some similarity. And in theoretical science, it's good to ask when you're told not to think in certain ways. It's good to ask, why not? Are we sure that we mustn't think in those ways? And usually there's a damn good reason why not, but not always. Sometimes it turns out this prohibition is misguided, and we've just talked about 2 or 3 examples of that. But I was careful to mention that you must ask, you must check and make sure there isn't a simple reason why not. For example, I said, in business, I assume you always have to worry about profit and loss, and you always have to worry about legal and ethical considerations. What was the company? Of course, Enron.
Enron. So, why do you think in that case they took the other view of why not, which is why not ignore this stuff?
Well, of course, the whole idea is to be able to distinguish those negative prohibitions that are there for a damn good reason and the ones that are not. And in this case, there was a damn good reason why you should pay attention to legal and ethical considerations. Yeah. And there was a damn good reason for worrying about profit and loss.
And there we have it. So, you've been involved with the Santa Fe Institute and the sort of which,
Oh
which
yes,
also
from the prehistory of the Santa Fe Institute up to now. That's where I work every day.
How did that come about, and was that another example of this why not thinking?
In a way, we met, a group of us, during the early 1980s in Los Alamos. These were people who were employed by Los Alamos in some cases. In other cases, like mine, they were consultants to Los Alamos. And we talked about our dream of starting a scientific institute in Santa Fe, which we all loved. But it would be a civilian scientific institute. It would not be run by the government, although it might accept government money if it were begged to on certain occasions. But the main thing that I emphasized in these discussions was that we ought to have no barriers among the different fields. At universities, you typically run into all these walls between the disciplines, coming from curricula, from textbooks, from sections of granting agencies, from curricula, and so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to have real interdisciplinary cooperation. It's possible, but it's very difficult. And I said that we should set up an institute where it was easy and where we encourage people to do it. And that's the way it works now. We have little groups that form after some discussion in the kitchen, usually, at tea time, to study problems of mutual interest. And each person can make a contribution, whether or not that person is trained in a relevant field, doesn't matter. As long as the person has some knowledge, intuition, is relatively bright, and so on, a contribution can be made. But we do have a rule that at least one person in the group should know something about the subject.
And that's all it takes to overcome these barriers?
No, it takes something else. It takes a determination, a real devotion to the idea of doing these things, because the languages are different from different fields, the way of judging ideas is different in different fields, people have different vocabulary in different fields, and overcoming these differences and barriers is not easy at all. But it is possible for people who have always dreamt of doing that. We had our founding seminars in the fall of 1984 at this room kindly lent us by the School of American Research in Santa Fe. Beautiful, beautiful weather. We had terrible problems getting people to go home. And, but anyway, I made the phone calls for a lot of the invitations, and I knew what people would say, because these were quite important, interesting scientists in many, many different subjects. And I knew they were going to say something like this. I have my teaching, I have my research, I'm writing 2 textbooks, and I consult for several companies, and I just don't have the time. I'm terribly sorry. Don't call me, I'll call you. But that isn't what they said. We had a list of people that we suspected might be interested in this project. And it turned out nearly every one of them said something like the following: when can I come? Can I come sooner? I've been dreaming about this all my life. Well, we hadn't expected that amount of enthusiasm, but that's what we got.
Which is great. We have and it's gone on to have a sort of storied development since then. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I'm curious, is there a question that is there a problem to which you wish we were asking why not about now?
Well, yes, it's something I'm working on very hard with some bright Russian linguists, and that is the question of distant relationships among human languages, to take the known families and see if they aren't descended from superfamilies, and if the superfamily shouldn't be grouped into a superfamily. In other words, to carry the process of historical linguistics back before 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, because the experts in the field mostly have this negative prohibition, this negative requirement. You must not think of anything before 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. It's wrong, it's unscientific, it's pre-scientific, it's misleading, it's not properly proved, and so on and so on and so forth. And I suspect that this is another one of those fake prohibitions, wrong prohibitions. I can't prove it rigorously at this time, but I suspect it is.
And in the world of business, is there something that you think businesses should be asking why not about? Or can they do a better job of processing why not?
Well, why not do the things that are represented here at Zeitgeist? This is a marvelous, really splendid milieu for thinking about important problems of business and its relation to every other human activity, including happiness, as we heard, including all the things that lead to happiness. Why not carry all that away from here and actually do it? Some people do, apparently, and I think it's marvelous.
Well, on that note, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Murray. It was wonderful to